Let's talk a little music in Loveland, Ohio. Everybody, I'm sure you've heard of Plaid Room Records, but I wonder if everybody is as equally familiar with Colemine Records, the record label of Terry Cole, who owns Plaid Room Records and the Colemine Records Label. There's a special event coming up. Colemine Records, Terry Cole is partnering, and there's a big announcement coming soon. But anyway, as part of that, we have as our special guest here on Loveland Beacon Talks, Terry Cole, to talk to us a little bit about that Colemine Records label and a hint at the big announcement that is coming soon. So hello everybody, I'm Chuck Gibson, and let's get right now to our special guest, Terry Cole from Colemine Records and Plaid Room Records. So welcome, Terry Cole. Thank you for joining us here on Loveland Beacon Talks. And for the listeners, Terry Cole is the owner. You guys are all familiar here in Loveland, Plaid Records, but also the Colemine Records label. So Terry Cole, thanks again for joining us. We're going to talk about, mostly we're going to talk about Colemine Records as opposed to your Plaid Records business. But let's just get right into that.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it very much. Colemine Records. We are an independent record label, and it's existed for since 2007.
Wow.
So 17-ish years. The first 8, I would describe it as a hobby because it was just me doing it when I was still a teacher, and it got serious and became a more substantial part of our business in 2015 when we opened up Plaid Room and decided, okay, we're fully in on the music industry and we're going to try to see if we can figure out a way to run this record label like an actual record label.
Well, and you and I were talking offline before we started just now, and it's like I said, I remember when you opened Plaid Room Records, and I got to talk to you then and see what was going on and found out it was way more than just going to be a record shop, that you actually had the label.
Yeah.
So here, that really came to fruition for you, and here's Colemine Records doing all kinds of things.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I mean, back then, we started, Bob and I, started with just the two of us. Yeah. We had 0 employees, and I was still teaching, and Bob was still working in software engineering. And now, almost 10 years later, and we have, full-time staff of 9 or 10.
Wow.
And, probably 4 or 5 more part-time folks. So it's pretty wild. It's been wild to see it actually come to fruition like we hoped it would. And see both sides of the company continue to benefit each other. There's plenty of days or months or years where the label leans into the shop and vice versa, and they both really helped each other grow over the years.
Well, we'll have to talk about that relationship, but real quick for the listeners, Bob is Bob who?
Sorry, Bob Cole. That is my brother, business partner, owner of the legal entity that is Plaid Room Records and Colemine. We're all one big legal entity, so...
The corporation of Terry and Bob Cole. I love that.
Yes, but, very fancy.
Well, so, and real quick, getting into the relationship of Colemine Records, the recording portion.
Yep.
And what's the relationship with Plaid Room Records, which is obviously the retail records business?
Yeah, so, Plaid Room, in a lot of ways, is very straight ahead. It's a retail operation, buying and selling records, used records, new records, which means we interact with people, private collectors, private individuals selling their used records to us. That also means we interact with distributors and record labels, buying new stock from distributors and record labels and selling it in our store. So it's, in a lot of ways, it's very straight ahead. But we are physically housed within the same building. So the Colemine offices are on the 2nd floor above Plaid Room. There is also overlap with staff. So there's folks that do 80% Colemine and 20% Plaid Room, or 50-50. So there's some overlap in staffing, especially when it comes to order fulfillment, because a lot of what we do here is pick records and pack them up and ship them out on both sides of the company. And so there's times when maybe Colemine has a massive shipping cycle, and so we're going to lean into the Plaid Room staff a little bit, or vice versa. It's record store day, and we've got 5,000 orders to fulfill, and so the Colemine people will be like, all right, cool, I'll come in this day and knock a bunch of crates out. Yeah. So they definitely, Colemine has benefited greatly from having a connection to independent retail, and that really has given us insight into how to grow Colemine nationally in other independent retailers, because we are one, and we know what the things that we need and that help us sell records and sell artists and move units, and so we've been able to really dial that in on the Colemine side of things.
Very cool. Well, so how did Colemine Records get started? I mean, that's something I wanted to give you the chance to I really want to give you the chance so the listeners can hear and understand the story behind it. So what's the story behind Colemine? Like you said, I know you said it was a little bit of a hobby at first, but
for sure, yeah. So I mean, it started. It started by our dad trained us how to sell records on eBay. This is like when we were teenagers. Wow. So I sold records on eBay starting when I was like 13, and I started selling in 98, 99 on eBay, and that's how I financed my college. So I paid for my undergrad and grad by selling records on eBay. Yeah. Cash, which was fun.
Heck yeah.
I had a police officer sent to my apartment one time when I was paying my tuition because they suspected I was selling drugs.
Of course they did.
Well, they charged you like 4% if you paid with a credit card or a debit card.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I'm not going to pay 4% of $8,000 on a semester tuition. This is at Miami and Oxford.
Right.
So anyway, so our dad really gave us we had a pretty deep knowledge of records and how to buy them and how to sell them. And I became interested in music production, actually, making records and producing records when I was in college. And so I I was in a band in college, a hip-hop band, and I wanted to learn how to make records and produce records and mix and engineer. And so I took some classes in Oxford, and I had an independent study where I was making music, and I wanted to release it, and I made up the name Colemine. I was going to name it Colemine, like C-O-A-L, as in a reference to kind of like digging in crates, like you're digging, looking for like really good records,
mining coal.
Looking for, but there was a label called Colemine that had just started in 2007.
No kidding.
A hip hop label, and I was like, well, I can't do that. So I was like, well, I'll just put my last name in there and we'll call it a day. And so I drew the logo on a napkin in Subway in Oxford, and that was it. So that was 2007, late 2007. I think I put out our first 45, like our first funk 45 in 2008. And
that's I'm going to interrupt here real quick because for the listeners again, I mean it is a record label and you press records.
Yeah,
so that first 45 was a vinyl.
Yeah, it was a 7-inch 45 RPM funk single, and that is still the backbone of the company is physical products.
Yeah.
So for 8 years, while I was a science teacher, I was a high school science teacher. I taught zoology and botany, and for 8 years, I just did it as a hobby. I would produce a couple 45s a year, put them out, sell them, hopefully not lose money. That was just the goal. It was never like crazy profitable. Even if you make 1,000 45s and you sell all 1,000, the most profit you're probably going to make is a couple $1,000. So it was just a hobby, and then eventually a couple bands started reaching out, and they were like, hey, do you sign artists? And I had never put together any legal agreement ever. I had no experience in that, and so I learned very quickly and decided, all right, sure. If I like the music, I bet I could do this for you. Do what I'm doing for my own music for you as well. Which is not a unique tale. That's how many independent record labels start. It's an artist putting out their own stuff, and then they put out their buddy's stuff, and then it's a record label. And so did that for about 8 years, and by 2014 had a catalog of probably 30 45s and 2 LPs, and it was starting to feel like it could be a thing, Like,
Yeah.
oh, this could, if I had time and maybe a little money, this could be a thing potentially that was a viable business venture. And combine that with frustration in the public school sector, and and that led me to call Bob one day in October of 2014 and be like, "Hey, man, we should quit our jobs and start a record store."
Now, what was Bob doing?
At that time, he was wrapping up his graduate degree in computer engineering.
Okay.
So when I called him, he was in Minnesota because he had just got on this big solo canoe camping trip.
Cool.
And he had just gotten out of the woods, and I called him and I was like, "Hey, man, I know you're like about to go start your first big boy job, but I think we should start a record store instead. And I'll meet you in Indianapolis on your way home at this record store, Luna Music in Indianapolis, that I think is great. I was like, I'll meet you there because this store sort of epitomizes a good vibe."
What you were seeing and thinking.
Yeah, and I was like, let's meet there. So we met there, we got some beers and dinner, and we just sat there in this bar.
But we're not going to say so like you got him drunk and he signed up.
No, we just hashed it out.
Yeah.
We just hashed out like big picture ideas, and then came home and started. And then I came down to Loveland, and there was a spot to rent over there by Montgomery Cyclery, and with the help of Cece from the Loveland Chamber of Commerce, she convinced Mike Books and Ott to let us rent that space.
Oh, right. I forgot that was part of their entities or
and so
properties.
So we started building shelves, and our younger brother Dave and some friends helped out a lot in the early days, and we were building shelves. They were building shelves in our parents' garage while I was teaching still, because we sort of realized like, all right, I need to keep teaching to just have money, some capital, in order to be able to start a record store and build it out and have a little bit of investment up front. I think I took my entire savings, which was like, I don't know, $14,000 or something, and I was like, all right, well, we have $14,000 to do this, to attempt to do this. And so we invested, I think, maybe $10,000 in new vinyl, and we thought that would get us a lot of new vinyl, and it was maybe like, I don't know, a shelf or two.
Well, I remember, going back to when you opened in that first location, I just was reminded when you said we were building shelves, because that was like, definitely, you guys built
everything. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, where the records were. I think you guys built that counter when you came in the door.
We built everything. We built the counter, we built all the shelves, we redid the floors. We put all the wood flooring in the basement here when we moved over here too.
Start from scratch.
Yeah. And we like building stuff. It's fun. So that was 10 years ago, and so the vision was, okay, if we can run a record store, it's going to give us a purview or a lens into how record labels market, because we are going to be on the receiving end of marketing from record labels as a retailer. And so we thought this will give us sort of a view into like what actual record labels do, because at that point it's just me in my basement. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just making music that I like and trying to sell it.
Right.
And it really worked. We really got to see and network with successful independent record labels and see what they're doing and get an idea of the market, and it was the best education you could ever ask for someone trying to ramp up an independent record label.
Well, that question I asked earlier about the relationship between Plaid Room Records and
it's direct.
This really brings into focus, like you said, it is a direct relationship.
Yeah, and
they correlate to one another.
Because you get to see what you like and don't like. You get to be like, oh, wow, this is why people hate the major labels. Or, oh, wow, this is why people love Sub Pop or love Third Man Records or Daptone or whoever, because you see the product, and then you see people come in and you ask, why are you get customer feedback. So you're getting insight from the label distribution side of things, but you're also seeing your customer facing. So you're seeing what people are buying, why they're buying it, what's motivating them, and that's pretty valuable when you're trying to build a company. So
who going back again, I'm going to bounce all over the place on you, Terry. Sorry about that. Going back, so who was that first artist that you signed?
that was not me.
That wasn't you.
It Could Be Shakedown, Afrobeat group from Brooklyn.
How cool is that?
Yeah, it was great. It was killer.
From Brooklyn.
Yeah, and I mean that's sort of how it grew. It was like it was a lot of Brooklyn, and it was a lot of West Coast bands. And at the time, there was a couple other labels that I looked up to doing similar things, like that were doing funk and soul and R&B, like vintage sounding, 60s, early 70s inspired. Daptone and Truth and Soul were those two labels, and they were both Brooklyn based. And I think the thing that allowed us, or me back then, to grow at a rate that I had no business growing at was I was willing to sign bands that I didn't produce directly. Whereas Daptone and Truth and Soul were pretty much only putting out records that they were producing in-house. And whereas I was like, well, I'm going to put out my own stuff that I like and I want to put out, but if someone else is making records that I think are all fantastic and fit in my vibe, well, I'm going to put those out too. And so I started signing.
Well, so how did that relate? I mean, like, so somebody produced, recorded their, whatever it was, let's say something that could be a 45 or even an LP. You got the music, and then you guys pressed the records on the Colemine label? Or?
Yep.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, so we would license the rights from the artist under a certain time, 5 or 10 years, and a 50-50 net profit split of all the profit made from the exploitation. But we signed a few Brooklyn bands, signed a few West Coast bands, and then the name sort of started to get out there. And then a lot of bands started hitting us up with stuff that were like, oh, I love these records. I just made a couple songs. Would you want to put them on a 45? And that's really how it grew.
What's the balance? I mean, because it's an interesting situation. Ultimately, you found yourself as like, you get to decide. Like, do we like this guy's music or this group's music or whatever it is? Do we like this music and do we want it? So you're in that position where like maybe sometimes you said no.
Oh, I say no a lot. I mean, every day I say no.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably I would say the most important job that I have is I am the only one that decides what we put out.
And discerning this is good and this isn't.
Yeah, and it's not good in a universal standpoint. It's good according to me.
Right.
Like, it's not...
Right.
There's plenty of things that I've passed on that are very commercially viable. There's plenty of things that I've passed on that have proven to be commercially viable.
Yeah. Have you got one of those that like you're like, shoot, I should have.
I don't look back and go. I have no things that I look back and think I would do that differently. No matter I never sign something based on marketability.
I got you. Okay.
I sign things because as soon as I do that, it's poison. Yeah, it's poison. As soon as you're signing based on someone's TikTok numbers or their streaming numbers, or you've lost. You've already lost.
Yeah.
So I sign things based on a few factors. One, do I love the music, and do I just love the music?
Yeah.
And then two, can I get along with this artist? And then three, are the expectations of that artist and the expectations from me and my staff aligned? Because if all three of those things are not true, it's not going to work. If I love the music, but I think this is going to be a volatile relationship with this artist, sorry, gotta pass. Like, it's not worth me stressing, my staff stressing, because I like the music. Like,
right.
Sorry, there'll be more great songs, but you'll find the right person. So that's, but yeah, that It Could Be Shakedown. That was the first 45. That was outside of me and my group of friends.
Yeah.
And it really opened up a door. And then there were a lot of key signees over the years, or key records that we released over the years. Releasing a 45 from Monophonics and Kelly Finnegan, who was a San Francisco-based band, and that sort of opened us up to the West Coast a little bit. And then we put a 45 out by Jungle Fire, and that really broke us in like the DJ scene. And then we signed a band called Duran Jones and the Indications from Bloomington, and they sort of took on a life of their own. It was an LP. It was released in 2016, so shortly after the store had opened, and it really took on a life of its own. And that was a very much a learning experience, because we got to kind of sit sidecar we ended up signing a co-release deal with a much larger record label, and we sort of got to sit sidecar and see what an actual independent record label that knows what they're doing would do, and go, oh, and take notes. And you're like, wow, this is great. How else would we get into this situation? You know, I don't know of any other way than to just see somebody do the work.
Right.
And so that was very, very important. And since then, it's just sort of very organically, and at times too quickly, grown. And, you know, it's been amazing. The fact that we have a staff of, 5 of us that are full-time Colemine is pretty wild.
Yeah.
And the digital side, the digital growth we've seen over the last 5 to 6 years, I never ever would have foreseen, and it's been wild.
Well, let's tell the people a little bit about what that. Tell me, because I don't know yet until we talk about it. But so it started out Terry and friends, and you admittedly said it's kind of a hobby.
Yep.
And then, well, you know what? Somebody says, let's. Would you sign somebody? And you're okay, and you figured out how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point it was Terry and friends, and then it was now you got to say
Ecobee Shakedown.
Ecobee Shakedown. I got to get that right. So Ecobee Shakedown, number 1. So now it's Friends and then Ecobee Shakedown.
And then it just got out of control.
So here we are.
2015, there's probably 20 different bands represented at that point.
That's great growth.
Yeah.
In 8 years.
Yeah. But the nice thing is once I figured out a way to be able to sell 500 45s or 1,000 45s, I could sort of go to bands that maybe I didn't have any business dealing with, maybe that were like a couple tiers up, and go, hey, I know you have this LP, and you already have this out on digital services, but I think these 2 tracks are dope and would be a sweet 45. It's for me to go and just license physical rights to 2 songs that are already out is no skin off the artist's back. It's not like I'm asking for digital rights or publishing administration rights or anything. I'm just saying, let me go make 500 of that 45. And that was how the catalog grew, because it was a very non-intrusive, very low-stakes thing for that artist to allow me to do, but it did allow me to build a catalog. And then all of a sudden you look at it and you go, damn, there's like 40 killer 45s here, and these are all killer. Like, these are all great. And so that's when it starts to become a brand. There's more brand recognition, and there's a sound associated with the label.
Well, what defines great? Like you said, they're all great. You got 40 45s that are great. What defined great? How did you know?
I mean, I guess it's all autobiographical. I think they're great.
Oh, God, that's why. That's why I wondered. Is it like because
I think Colemine's sound is relatively narrow. It's steeped in organic, sort of gritty, dirty, soul, R&B, funk, some jazz leanings, some Latin leanings, some Afrobeat leanings, but it's all in this pretty narrow lane. And I think that's a key to success, is that eventually we got enough buy-in from customers and fans that it was like they didn't care. They didn't know the band. They didn't care.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a new Colemine 45
out?
Cool, yeah. I never heard this band. Sick. I'm sure I'll like it. I'll buy a copy. Yeah. And so you get to the point where people are just buying stuff blind because they trust the label and they trust my A&R, essentially.
You know what? That's a great explanation, because, like you said, because now it sells, because it's like we know the sound of this label, and we like it. So I never heard of them, but we're going to like it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not unlike labels from the 60s and 70s. It's for a lot of them, when you knew Stax had a sound.
Right.
You knew Motown had a sound.
Right.
And you were like, cool, I'll probably like this because I like these other 8.
Well, by the way, your facility here is bigger than the original Motown.
Yeah, it's probably bigger than Motown and Stax combined.
I'm saying. Well, it is. Have you been to the? Just a side note here. Have you been to the Motown?
I have not. I've been to the Stax one. I haven't been to the Motown.
You got to go to the Motown one.
The Stax one really resonates with me because they're so similar. Stax had a record store.
Well, Motown's different sound,
Yeah.
big time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's all pretty close to us, but the Stax one is like, they had a record store out front and they had a label in the back, and it's like, man, it's right on the money.
Well, do you still, for Colemine Records, do you still do a mix of, reaching out because you've heard something, and also obviously they reach out to you?
Yeah.
So that's a nice.
It's a good balance.
I was going to say.
And I think during like the rapid growth period from like 2018 to 2022, or I guess to now, let's say, or recent, it's been really hard for me to find time to do the things that I'm producing because I'm busy doing everything else, and so I don't really have time. But I think there's been a shift over the last probably 2 years, I would say, that like I'm purposely carving out time or weeks out of the year to produce records. And I mean, the first full length that was produced in this room when this used to be the studio, before I moved into my house. And it was from Okonski. It's a piano trio, like jazz trio. And yeah, that felt really, really good to get a whole record done here, all in-house, mixed here, artwork done here, everything. And so yeah, I'm just trying to do, I don't know, if I could do like 3 or 4 LPs a year and a handful of 45s, whether it's my projects or I'm producing someone else, just feels good.
Yeah.
And I think it keeps our identity tight, within how I want things to sound.
So how do you distribute Colemine Records?
So
I was going to say, aside from obviously you sell them here at Plaid Records.
Yeah, for sure.
So the retail distribution is boom right here.
Yeah, people will live local; they can just walk in and grab it. We do a lot of sales from our web store. We have a person, George Menzies, who handles all of our direct-to-consumer fulfillment. So we ship a lot of orders out from here. We have a very important partner in Bloomington, Indiana, Secretly Distribution. They're a very big player in the indie music game in the United States. They are a very important part of our They are our distributor. That means they handle distributing to independent shops around the country. They also get our product, to the big box stores like Best Buy and Target and Barnes and Nobles, Amazon, all that. And then they also service our music to all of the DSPs, so Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, Deezer, YouTube. So they are a very robust, important highway for us. But at the end of the day, it's still our job to, no matter how great the network and the highway that they are providing is, it's our job to push people down the highway. You can have the greatest...
Get the engine started and the music rolling, right?
Yeah, you can have the greatest distribution network in the world, but it doesn't matter if nobody cares and nobody's buying anything or nobody's streaming. So it's still our job to market, and that's really the crux of what a record label is. A record label is a marketing machine. We put out music and then we market that music, and that is the crux of what we do every day. And what's changed over the last 5 to 6 years is, like 6 years ago, 0 employees, and doing Colemine. It was just me doing Colemine, and we had some staff helping with the shop, but not much help on the Colemine side. Probably because I was like unwilling to delegate or allow anyone else to do anything, to my own deficit.
Part of that learning curve, huh?
For sure, letting go of things.
Yeah.
But it was mostly physical revenue. In 2018, most of our revenue was physical. Probably 80% of what we were bringing in was physical, and 20% was digital. And this is sort of the onset of streaming. So this is before Spotify has become what it is now.
Right.
And when we signed over with Secretly, one of the big things that we wanted to do was, because we were with a larger distributor before, and we just didn't, we felt like we were just throwing music into the ether, and we just had no idea how to get better at digital.
Yeah.
We just felt like we were just putting it out there, and sometimes it would do well, and sometimes it wouldn't, and we were like, we need help. And so one of our asks when we signed on with Secretly was, teach us how to do digital better. Teach us how to be better at growing our digital actively rather than just counting on happenstance or luck to happen every once in a while. And they've done that for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
at this point, our profit, our revenue is about split. So gross revenue from physical and gross revenue from digital is about split.
Wow.
But the profit, it's expensive to make records. So
Yeah.
if we do $1 million in sales I would say we do probably, we're in the month of September, we probably do about a million, close to $1 million or so in physical sales a year from Colemine. But it's expensive to make
Yeah.
$1 million worth of records.
Yeah,
Probably-
$1 million isn't $1 million profit.
No,
Yeah,
it's probably it probably costs around $400,000 or maybe $500,000 to make that $1 million in revenue. Whereas digital, marketing costs for sure, but they don't add up to that same manufacturing. So
Right.
the profit from right now, last year was the first year
Profits weighted more heavily in digital.
for sure.
Nice.
Last year was the first year where digital, we saw like the eclipse happened, where we saw digital outpace physical, and it was sort of sad because you were like, physical is such a big part of our identity,
Right.
And it's not like physical's not growing; it's just that digital is growing at a pace that I don't think physical for us will ever be caught now. So last year was a sort of I remember the graph when it was like, I remember that it was July when they crossed, and I was like, this is the first month ever that we did more digital revenue
Wow.
than physical, and now it's like I don't think we'll ever catch it.
Well, how many are, now here's the thing, Terry. Time flies when you're having fun.
For sure.
We've hit it like 30 minutes already. So we're gonna get together again.
Cool.
And
Yeah.
We knew that before we started today. For the listeners didn't know that, but we knew that. This is a great, fascinating story just about Colemine. But I did say before we started we were going to hint for the listeners, something's coming to Loveland.
Yeah. Yes. 100%. A big obstacle that I have grappled with since the company really started ramping up was
Right.
we sell tens of thousands of records. We do 25 million streams a month nationally, right? It's a lot of streams. It's a lot of people listening to our music. But I've always felt that it's wild that I can go to LA or New York and see a band that we represent and they sell 500 tickets. But yet, so we have a decent sized footprint in the independent music scene nationally. But you wouldn't know it locally.
Right.
Because, it's an office. What are people going to like? You can walk.
Well, there's a brick and mortar. There's a front door for Plaid Records.
You can walk in the Plaid Room.
I didn't even know Colemine is like upstairs.
100%.
Right.
And it's like, and why? Maybe the answer is maybe people don't care about a record label existing in Cincinnati, Ohio, let alone Loveland, Ohio, right? But I think we are trying to do what we can to amend that and have more local awareness, so that people do hopefully have pride in the fact that, like, oh yeah, the band, the Black Pumas, who have been nominated for 6 Grammys and played Biden's inauguration and played on the Grammys and all these things, we signed them in 2018. We signed them. Or when you see, Kelly Finnegan's music on a Bose ad, you're like, oh yeah, that's a Colemine artist. Or, all these little things.
And we don't know it here in Loveland.
Correct, right. So a big part, a step to hopefully rectify that is by partnering with the Loveland Stage Company to have our artists, when they're in town or if they are in town and are on album cycle, have them hopefully perform at the Loveland Stage Company. And so it's a very obvious connection because we can go, hey, look, we are your local record store. We are your local record label doing big things nationally, but also
right here.
There they are. There's the artist.
So there's more to come on that. That's it.
Yes.
We're going to cut off there.
Cool.
That's a clue, and you're going to hear from Terry Cole and Colemine Records again here on Loveland Beacon Talks as that first event comes together and gets officially announced. But
cool,
Terry, listen, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem
for taking the time.
I'm always down to gab about this.
And I just feel like we could talk a whole lot more.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Sure.
It's weird. It's a weird industry, and it's strange.
Well, I don't know anything about it, so everything we just talked about is like I'm learning.
I mean, there's
so
much misinformation and questions and interest when it comes to the streaming side of things. Like it's a whole big mystery. So yeah, I love talking about this stuff. It's fun.
One last thing from you about Colemine Records. We were talking a little bit about the numbers. So, like, what do you ship in a year, or what did you ship last year in terms of artists that Colemine Records, or what?
So in a
numbers.
Yeah. In a given year, we try not to put out any more than about 9 LPs a year, like 9 new LPs a year, because we had a year where we put out like 11 or 12, and that was a lot. So I think 9 is sort of the sweet spot for us as far as number of new LPs we'll put out in a year. Probably in a year anywhere between 10 and 15 new 45s. But yeah, we ship. I mean, I think we pressed somewhere in the neighborhood of 80-some thousand records last year.
That's the question I meant to ask you. How many records did you press? That's the impressive.
I don't know how many we sold. I should know that number offhand, but we pressed around 80,000. Yeah, and we'll probably press more this year by the end of the year.
Let's help you sell a few. So what's the best way for people to get them? Aside from the people here locally walking in the front door, what's the best way for people to find Colemine Records artists and music?
The first thing I would say is, I mean, obviously people can go to ColemineRecords.com. All of our stuff is there. But if I'm on my pulpit, my industry pulpit, what I would say is the best way to support independent music in general is by buying records from local record stores, independently owned record stores. Because if you go into Used Kids in Columbus and you buy a Colemine record, that store makes some money, our distributor makes some money, the label makes some money, the artist makes some money. So a purchase at an independent record store supports the entire ecosystem. Now, do we make more money if you buy it from the website? Sure, 100%. But my first piece of advice is always, if you have a good local record store, go there first. And if they don't have it, tell them to get it.
Well, then everybody gets helped.
Yeah, because I mean, it's not sustainable that we're just going to sit here in a silo and ship Colemine Records and can just discount retailers around the country. It's not a thing, because retailers are why we have grown. Because we've gotten them hip to us. We've sent them our records. We go, hey, put this on. I think you'll like it. Yeah. And they've done it. And their retailers are an integral part of how we have grown and will continue to grow, for sure.
Well, now this is like, so I don't want to throw a label on myself like old guy. Like old guy. We won't throw that label on me. But, so, I mean, Spotify streaming, getting the physical 45s or LPs from the record stores, but is it like, do you guys still try to get Colemine Records to like a radio station?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so that's still part of the game.
We still send a lot of CDs.
I got you.
To radio stations. Yeah. Most radio stations now want digital files. They want WAV files. But I mean, radio is an integral. We have a full-time radio person that all they do is, we have a full-time radio person in the U.S. and we have a full-time radio person in the U.K. and all they do is, plug us to. The UK is a lot easier than the US. The UK has got like 6 stations. BBC 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Right.
And the US is hundreds of stations across the country.
100.
And college stations and non-commercial and local, and so it's a lot more complex, but it's still very integral because, I mean, people that listen to KEXP or KCRW or KUTX or WXPN or The Current, there are some very, very key tastemaker stations in the U.S. that are very, very important still, for sure.
Well, we learned a lot today. Cool. And at least I did, and hopefully listeners, were enjoying it, and some learning a lot as well. And we're going to learn more the next time. But again,
sounds
for
good.
Today, that'll do it. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Until next time, Terry. Thank you, Terry Cole, for joining us on this edition of Loveland Beacon Talks. I look forward to having you back again soon after to make the big announcement of the partnership that's coming for a special music series that is going to be, and I'll give a little bit of a hint, coming up at the Loveland Stage Company, part 2 of the special music series, and you're going to be in partnership on that. So Terry Cole, thank you so much for joining us on Loveland Beacon Talks, and everybody, thank you for listening in, and keep your ears and eyes open for a special edition Loveland Beacon Talks coming up with Terry Cole. Will be back with us. For now, I'm Chuck Gibson saying thanks for listening to Loveland Beacon Talks.